Ladies and gentlemen, we are less than 30 days away from arguably the most important election in our lifetime. Now more than ever, we need to do whatever it takes for as long as it takes to move the needle. This month, we're bringing to you one of our monthly Alpha Advocacy in Action webinar series, U.S. Electoral Politics and Historical Perspective, featuring our very own national historian, Brother Dr. Robert L. Harris, who I'll introduce in a second. This topic is the Willie Horton Ad. I don't know if many of you remember the Willie Horton Ad, but you'll have an opportunity to hear from our panel members, as well as social media, fake news, and disinformation. I'm Joe Paul, proudly serving the greatest fraternity in the whole wide world as the Executive Director and Chief Operating Officer. We have an illustrious panel of decorated brothers who I'd like to bring up shortly. First off, we want to bring up our General President, Brother Dr. Everett B. Ward, the 35th person in the history of our organization to serve in this capacity. Brother Dr. Ward, pleasure to see you, Brother General President.
Thank you. Thank you, Bro Paul. It's an honor to be with you tonight.
Indeed it is. Great seeing you as always. Coming up next, our national historian, Brother Dr. Robert L. Harris, who's Professor Emeritus at Cornell University, where our illustrious fraternity was founded. Brother Dr. Robert L. Harris, welcome to the conversation, my brother.
Thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to a very lively conversation and with Brother Ward and our very distinguished journalists with us. I'm looking to learn a lot.
Indeed, indeed. You are not alone, as Michael Jackson would say, my brother. So last but certainly not least, Brother Jeff Ballou, who currently is a news editor at for the Americas at Al Jazeera Media Network. He is also the 110th person to serve as the president of the National Press Club. He is the first Black man to do so, having served since 2017. Brother Jeff Ballou, it's so great to see you, my brother. Welcome to the conversation.
Thank you, Brother Paul, and thank you, Brother General President Ward Harris. It's always good to be amongst my brothers and ready for a wonderful conversation.
And so, brothers, without further ado, I want to hand it over to you. Have a great conversation. I will be listening with open ears and taking notes, as Brother General President likes to do. So thank you, guys. Brothers, have a great conversation.
Well, if I might start, one of the reasons why we decided to label this the Willie Horton Ad, social media and disinformation. Many of our younger brothers might not be familiar with the Willie Horton Ad when George H.W. Bush was running for president against the governor of Massachusetts. And given that the governor of Massachusetts had this program of individuals being able to spend a weekend away from jail, this was something that Bush looked upon as being soft on crime, especially since Willie Horton was able to get out on furlough. And during the time that he was out, of course, that big taboo, that bugaboo, he raped a white woman and assaulted her boyfriend. And so this was used to say that he was that Dukakis, who's the governor at the time, was soft on crime. And the Republicans always use this issue of law and order against Democratic candidates. They've also used the issue of the lawless, so-called lawless black man as a way of generating opposition and support for their candidacy. So this is a theme that we've seen played out again in this election year in various forms. They haven't had anything quite as egregious, I guess I can say. You can correct me, Brother Ballou and Brother Ward, if I'm wrong. I don't think they've had anything quite as egregious as the Willie Horton Ad, but they have tried to frighten white voters, especially white voters in the suburbs. And it seems that Trump, in many respects, has kind of given up on the black vote. One of the things that I fail to understand, and maybe Brother Ballou, you can help me a little bit with this, and that is why there's a substantial number of Latinos who are supporting Donald Trump when he started out very much um, slandering Latinos as murderers and rapists, what have you. You have a sense of why I gather that in Florida right now, he's got about 30% of the Latino vote, according to the polls.
Well, thank you, Brother Harris, for your question. I think I would like to go back to a couple of ticks on some you were laying out, especially when you talk about the Willie Horton ad that was supposed to be focused on, as people who were involved in the ad will say, they claim it was a race. They claim it was about a wedge issue, about a blue collar, about trying to get blue collar voters to vote Republican. We all know that's not the truth. I mean, that was their point of view, but clearly the impact in 1988 was that it was to use us as very much boogeyman, and scare people about in the suburbs. There's another thing that I would raise about the suburbs. Suburbs have changed. The demographics in suburbs have changed. So this effort, repeated effort, time, and especially with this current White House, to try to scare white folks in the suburbs, don't realize how many of us have moved into those areas. So they're more diverse than they were in '88, and definitely in 2008, and in 2000, even 2016. So that strategy may not work as well as he thinks it may. To your point about Latinos, and no community of color is monolithic, and I think it's a point worth driving home. There are conservatives in the African American community. There are conservatives in the Latino community. There are conservatives in every community, and to simply say that all Latinos or all African Americans should suddenly vote Democratic proceeds from a false assumption. The conservative movement, setting aside Trumpism for a moment, that's a whole different discussion. But generally speaking, the conservative movement does speak to traditional values, and those traditional values often come through communities, especially communities rooted in faith. And as much as we'd like to say that African Americans, Latinos often vote in strong numbers with the Democratic Party, a lot of conservative, go to a Latino church or an African American church on any given Sunday, or any given day of the week. There's a strong streak of conservatism coming with it. So let's not act like we're just we're just of one ilk. And so so that right for outreach, and the president has indeed tried to seize upon that on a number of fronts. I'm not sure if he has even really, and I would respectfully take issue that he has given up on the African American vote. He has thrown quite a bit of money and thrown even in some policy efforts, and taking credit for some policy efforts of the previous administration and making it his own. But he's really driving home this First Step Act that Kim Kardashian and his son and everybody else were all involved with, son-in-law were all involved with, to say, see, look, it's kind of like Willie Horton in reverse. It's saying, I'm helping people get a second chance, but these are things that were in the pipeline from the previous administration, but Congress didn't bring it home for the Obamas, but he was able to deliver it. And he's saying, and he turned some of those same people that got out of jail because of this act and put them right on stage during the Republican National Convention to say, see, look, it's safe to vote for black.
Let me ask Brother Ward.
So
I know you've been working on this, especially through the Divine Nine, in promoting voter turnout. My oldest daughter, who lives in South Carolina and is an educational administrator there, she's been working very closely with her sorority, the AKAs. They're very fired up, and with the NAACP in South Carolina. But one of the things that she's noticed as she's been calling people, and she has a list for her district of the voter rolls, she's been really surprised at the number of people who have never voted, who never participated in an election. What are our efforts to try? What she's doing, of course, they're calling people and trying to be sure to make sure they're registered, help them if they need it, trying to make sure they get out to the polls. But what efforts are being made to try to get people to vote, for some of them for the first time?
Well, Brother Harris, I think there are a number of things that are happening. This past Saturday, I had the pleasure to be with our brothers in Durham, North Carolina, Beta Theta Lambda chapter, and our college chapter from North Carolina Central University, Gamma Beta chapter. And we actually were out doing voter registration drives most of Saturday. And when we talked to people who were not registered to vote, there's a real cynicism among people that believe that they have no hope in the political leaders, that there have been many promises made. One young lady said, no one cares about poor people. They say they do, but there's nothing in their record and no policy that says they're really trying to make a difference. So we spent a lot of time with her, helping her understand that in order to change that perception and make it a reality where you have people who are committed, that she needed to participate in the political process. So we've got to keep educating the community and making sure that they understand the correlation between their vote and the immediate resources and benefits that they can see at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level. As she said to us, voting for the president of the United States has no relevancy to her at the local level. Well, we began to explain to her how it did, and how this election is not just about the president, but it's about down ballot, as the term is used quite often. So we've got to continue to do a lot of education, and politics is 365 days of the year. And so organizations like our fraternity and other fraternities and sororities, NAACP, the churches, our other community-based organizations, our neighborhood organizations, and then just those conversations across the fence. It's important for us to educate and continue to help people understand. One of the other variables I think is critical too is we don't teach civics in high school anymore, as we are building young people to understand the importance of civic engagement. When most of us were in school, we understood that it was a duty, it was a responsibility to be a part of the electoral process. We remember getting our driver's license and registering to vote was two of the most important things that we could do. So we've got to continue to do that. I would like to go back and talk about Willie Horton, because I was in that campaign in 1988 and remember it vividly. I do think, as Brother Ballou said, the persons who produced that want us to believe that it was all about the blue collar vote, but it was not. It was clearly a race-based commercial that they knew would have the kind of fear that was intended to motivate certain people to the polls. but you hear it now. It's the same law and order, anti-crime message that you hear now. I think the difference in this election with our current president, he's running a dual message. So you can hear, for example, on Black radio, talking about HBCUs, talking about Black economic development, and you have various people endorsing his presidency. But at the same time, you hear the message that the criminals are going to come to your suburbs and take over your suburbs. Brother Ballou is correct. Suburbs in America look very different now. But the image that's being projected is not the individuals that are currently living in the suburbs. It's this whole illusion that from the so-called ghettos and inner cities of America, you will have this great invasion into your suburban lifestyle, and crime will leave certain elements of a city and come to your suburbs. And all of that is about injecting fear into voters to get a certain reaction. Now, some would say that's targeted particularly to white women who live in the suburbs, but there's a very strategic strategy that's being used by this current administration. That's a duality of messages that's happening now.
I'd like to ask Brother Ballou. I read Donna Brazil's book, Hacks, on the 2016 election. And she said that some of her young relatives were writing her, talking with her about information they had received on social media. And the information looked like it was coming from Black Lives Matter. And they were being told that they didn't have any stake in the election, that what was the difference between the Democrats and the Republicans? Why do we need to take time to go out and vote? There's not a dime's bit of difference between the two candidates, between the major parties. I'm seeing some of that on social media now about we don't really need to get out and vote. How do we sort of combat that type of disinformation that's being spread not only on the internet and social media, but some of it I even see in news reports and reading the newspaper, where there are uh, news reporters, columnists, pundits who are picking up on some of these things and repeating it. And therefore it begins to spread. It looks like it has a certain legitimacy to it.
Thank you, Brother Harris. There's so I could speak for this for hours, but we don't have that kind of time. I had the privilege of actually interviewing Donna at the National Press Club when she released her book, and we talked about misinformation. We talked about foreign interference in elections, which the intelligence community has gone on record several times to Capitol Hill to say this is a thing. This is not a hoax. This is real. People are trying to make mischief of our elections. You can argue strategy all day long in terms of what how Democrats or Republicans have deployed their forces to try to win elections, but underneath that, you still have a currency of several countries, with Russia at the tip of the spear, so to speak, really trying to cause discontent and disillusion and confusion, and it's there. It's a matter of record. You can Google C-SPAN and pick a hearing of the intelligence committee. It's all there. And what people have to do, there are two things, at least two things. There's more than two, but there's two things that they have to do. One, very carefully choose their sources of news. and people have to really look at a number of sources, whether it is mainstream newspapers or historically white owned newspapers and networks, and historically black newspapers and electronic media as well. And it's important to have multiple sources, and not just from this country, but from other countries, and to be able to line these things up. And I recognize not everybody wants to take that sort of time to vet their media ecosystem, but it's important because too many times people just simply share without checking it out. What is popping up on their Facebook, what's popping up on their Instagram, what's popping up on their other various forms of social media, Twitter and other social media, retweet without even reading the article that's attached, or the video that's attached to the tweet. And it's so crucial. And as to your point about some of my colleagues who are picking up on it, there are some aspects of my profession who are engaging in the partisan game, and let's not clean that up. And it's important for us to be aware of that. There's a lot of history behind what amounts to propaganda. You can't, there's no other nice way to put it. And when you look at their history books that lay out all the tactics that have been around, for decades, if not centuries, about how you cause confusion on your opponent's side. And I think about this book that I have. It's well worn. It's On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder, and there's other books written by folks at Yale. I was on a panel with them for the Poynter Institute a few years back, and we talked about propaganda. We talked about misinformation. We talked about tried and true tactics of some of the world's greatest dictators. And I'm not trying to call the president of the United States anything, or any of his friends around the world that do the same things that he's doing in terms of making attacks on a free and independent press, making attacks on institutions that we rely on in the medical field, in the banking field, and so forth, to cause this. Steve Bannon, who was firmly in the president's camp when he was first coming into power, was had this phrase about causing destabilization and distrust in the major institutions of not just the country but the world. And people sort of laugh it off, but look at where we are now. Who's trusting the healthcare system? Who's trusting the banking system? Especially healthcare in the middle of a global pandemic, where people are pulling, just like people would pull up different statisticians about proving a point on statistics. People are doing the same thing with medicine and with public health, pulling handpicking the doctors that will parrot your political point, as opposed to the vast majority of good and well-meaning and well-trained public health experts who are trying to give us the best advice so we can navigate ourselves out of this global pandemic, as opposed to the political players who want to stay in power, who want to promulgate their agenda, or calling the best advice from the Dr. Fauci's world and so forth, quote unquote, fake news. A term I despise, by the way, because there's nothing fake about news, because it's based on facts. And if you're going to, attack a free and independent, going to cause confusion. And that's and they've done a very effective job. I can't play it, but but we're fighting back as we can by having journalism based in facts. So subscribe to your local newspaper, subscribe to your national newspaper, subscribe to our news and discussion outlets like our good brother Roland Martin, who has Roland Martin Unfiltered, and has these fact-based discussions that take on these issues and do them in a in a fact-based manner, and that's I do every day, and most of my
That's
colleagues
one of
do
the
every day.
things I'm glad you mentioned, Brother Roland Martin. Brother Ward, one time we had a very vibrant system of Black newspapers, radio stations, and Brother Martin is one of the few independent voices out there. Brother Ballou referred to his program, Roland Martin Unfiltered. And how do we support voices like that so that they can continue to bring us unfiltered news and information?
Well, I think one of the first things we have to do, both individually and collectively, is support good, strong journalists like Brother Roland Martin. It's imperative that we get unfiltered news and we really get the facts, and we're receiving the information from people who are trusted individuals, trusted professionals that we know will give us the facts. So we are encouraging I know we're encouraging alphas and people just of goodwill to subscribe to Roland Martin, but also to our Black newspapers. We have got to support our Black newspapers and support our Black radio stations, but then also make certain that we not sit on the information, but we have a responsibility as change agents to then take that information and circulate it as widely as possible within our networks, because it's so important. And then I want to also go back to a point that Brother Ballou made. And I think it's critical that we understand that many of the tactics that have been employed by this administration has been to suppress the vote of people of color, especially of African Americans. So if you look at all these tactics, and Brother Ballou is exactly right, it is political propaganda. While there are verbal attacks and plans about how mail-in voting is fraud and it is just going to destroy the electoral process, you don't hear that same level of commitment and determination when you talk about foreign government involvement in the electoral process. So where's that same level of federal intervention to stop foreign involvement and truly foreign invasion in the electoral process? To me, if you want to talk about patriotism, that is one of the most patriotic acts that we should fight against, is the intrusion and invasion in the electoral process. That is the foundation of American democracy. But if you listen to what's being said, you're telling other people that there's fraud, but you're also saying, but to my voting block, to my constituents, go to the polls and vote. So there's again that dual message that comes from this current administration. That's why it's important that we recognize and never forget how hard and how intentional, both through violence, through the court system, and through death, that we had to obtain the right to vote. And that's why we've got to continue to say to each generation that you must be a registered voter and you must be civically engaged and very active in the political process. Regardless of the political party, you make that choice, but your voice needs to be heard.
Brother Ballou, how is the foreign press looking at
Yes.
the Black Lives Matter movement, the demonstrations, and uh, do they look at this as basically being nonviolent, peaceful, civic protest, or are they taking a clue from the Trump administration and looking at this as being violent, disorderly protests? Now, we read that there have been a number of demonstrations in foreign capitals around the issue of Black Lives Matter, that people are beginning to wake up to the way in which Black people in the United States and abroad have been oppressed historically. But I was just wondering, are they getting full information on this? Are they interpreting the demonstrations through a particular lens or not?
I would say, thank you, Brother Harris, that we're, journalists, either domestic or international, are seeing this moment for what it is. It's a global movement. And they're saying, and I think they're, for the most part, approaching it in a balanced way. There are political players that would like to have you believe that that the overwhelming majority of the protests are violent or not, or whatever. But when you really look at the journalism that's covered this movement, the overwhelming majority of it is looked at this as a peaceful movement that is, try to really, address a proper and more factual, a fuller telling of the global story of people who've not traditionally been in power, and that's important to understand. The role of slavery in the role, and not just in the United States, but you're seeing statues coming down in London. You were seeing movements happening in so many different countries that are aligning themselves with Black Lives Matter throughout Europe, throughout Asia, through other it's been an incredible thing, and journalism's job, when done right, and I think by and large it has told people, look, this is real. People are sick and tired of people being killed by rogue officers of the law. And the heart and soul of this was built around police brutality, and this is something that has resonated globally because we're not the only country doing it, and people are saying, hey, we got to get on the right side of history. And journalists have looked at this movement as something, is not a flash in the pan. They're seeing that this is something that has changed. Our journalism has given light to the fact that this has changed how corporate boards are shaped, how universities are shaped, how museums are shaped. Just about every major institution has been touched by this movement. And journalism's job has been to talk about this story, and is far from done yet. But it is up against a narrative, a political narrative, that is trying to box it for its own selfish means.
Brother Paul, I think we have some comments, some questions from the audience, from the viewers. Do you have some of those we might respond to? Brother Paul?
I'm not sure Brother Paul is in.
Here we are.
But I'm looking at the comments. I'm not seeing any questions.
Can you hear?
Brother Hauser, Brother Paul, you guys. Yeah, are there any questions for us? I think we're having a little bit of a tech issue while we're waiting for Brother Paul to jump in.
Well,
I just want to raise something. Oh, go ahead, Brother Ward. I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead, Brother Ballou. Go ahead.
Now, there's one thing that I hope that is a big takeaway from this discussion tonight, is that brothers really and the broader audience get a sense that facts matter, history matters, perspective matters, and those all undergird one biggest thing, and that's action matters. Because if we're asking people to vote, whether it's for the dog catcher or for the president of the United States, they have to understand the why. and the why is, I hope, what they take away from tonight's discussion, why it matters. And we can talk about, people fought, bled, and died, and those are important things to do, but you also have to bring that message forward to a newer and younger generation that's very detached from that sense of history, and why you have to sort of bowl down their lane as well. So we need to make sure that we engage, as you talked about, Brother Ward. There's the various organizations that the fraternity is partnered with. There's others, Protecting Our Vote. There's vote.org, and others where we're reaching into younger audiences and having those important discussions about voter education. Brother Paul's with us. Do you have any questions for us?
Yes, my brothers, we do have a question, and it's around GOTV and our efforts around getting and galvanizing the Black and Brown vote. There are many individuals who feel like the young vote has been taken for granted, and so how do we get young people out to vote as we deal with all of the fake news and social media and not really knowing what to believe? How do we get folks past social media to the polls?
Brother Ward, you're out getting individuals registered and encouraging them to come to the polls. Is this resonating with younger voters?
Well, one of the things I learned was that you got to listen to young people. That's the first thing we have to do, is listen to them. And then also, in listening to them, talk with them about the forums where they can go and get the facts and get the right information, and differentiate between political rhetoric versus the facts. And so we've been encouraging our younger members and younger voters to use their social media to put out the facts. One of the things that I've just been most impressed with are the young people that are organizing Black Lives Matter, organizing college campuses and university movements. So I think we've got to continue to work with them to get the message out. And then also, as Brother Ballou said, it's not enough for us to talk about, while we have to give that historical narrative, we've got to also give the relevance of what it means to them currently. So having the right person to have legislation that impacts positive home ownership, economic development, about student loans, having a U.S. Department of Education and a Congress that will support doing away with student debts and giving those kinds of opportunities where you don't have that burden of high student debt. We've got to go to the reality of where they are as young people and make sure they understand the correlation between that state legislator setting policy at the state level and what it means to them in their respective communities. So I'm very encouraged, but the first thing is you got to listen to them, and you got to bring them into the political process as equal participants. We can't just go to them on election day and say we need you to vote. We need them involved in the process throughout the political process. Let's have them helping us with strategy. Have them involved in the get out the vote strategy. Have them involved in the message development. That's how you engage young people and keep them involved. I tell you, my previous experience, that was one of the greatest joys. Like you, Brother Harris, when you work on a university campus, you learn how to listen to students and let them be a part of the process. And that's really critical.
Brother Paul, you have another question for us?
We do, Brother Dr. Harris. We do. I tell you, one of the things that grinds my gears, brothers, is when we're all on social media. When you see someone post something that they have not checked, they have not fact checked, and you know it's wrong. And you may enter their inbox and say, hey, please take this down, or why are you posting this? Brother Jonathan V. Jackson had a question, which is really good for the panel. It's how best can we combat misinformation and false equivalencies?
Brother Ballou, you've had some experience in this area.
It's an ongoing thing. and I feel Brother Paul and Brother Jackson's frustrations. One of the three things come to mind. One, and I said this earlier, but I'll try to boil it down in simpler terms. Choose your news sources wisely. Uh, and one, two, don't just, and this goes to what Brother Paul was talking about. Don't just share something because it looks good and it feels good. Stop, think, and vet, read through it, and then check it out. See if it comes up in another, reputable news source. If it's, and make sure it's not coming from a partisan point of view. There are too many, whether it's red state over here or share blue over there. Those aren't sources. Those are, they have partisan points of view, and they have, they have a goal to win you over to their side for political purposes. But if you're going to the Washington Post, or you're going to the Chicago Defender, or you're going to the Pittsburgh Courier, or you're going to the Los Angeles Sentinel, if you're going to the Chicago Tribune, or if you're going to news sources on the electronic side and CBS or CNN or Fox or Al Jazeera, where I work, some people will say that some of these news sources have issues, and it's important for you to look at them for what they are, study them for what they are, even if you don't agree with them. Mm-hmm. And so, saying, "Oh, I'm never going to watch Fox." You darn well should be watching Fox to make sure that they are presenting, as they're presenting their point of view. You compare it against CNN, and you compare it against MSNBC, and you compare it against Al Jazeera. Then you can sort out for yourself what the true facts are, and don't just parrot what you see. Think through, be critical thinkers. Brother Harris and Brother, we all talk about civics and fun, and the lack of having that in our schools. We really need to have three things: trusted news sources, comparing what you don't share right away, and engage in critical thinking. That helps. That's a big start, because charity does begin at home. You can't, we try our best as journalists to present the facts, but there's a whole lot of folks out there trying to imitate what we do and don't necessarily have your best interest at heart.
There are several organizations, such as the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under the Law, the NAAC Legal Defense and Education Fund. I understand the AKAs are bringing together 1,000 lawyers who will be on call. Brother Ward, is this information being distributed widely so that individuals who might encounter a problem at the polls know who to call, who to consult with, not to be intimidated? I understand that Donald Trump has put out a call for his supporters to be observers at the polls. And we know that that's a tactic that's been used for intimidation in the past. I can remember in my neighborhood on the west side of Chicago, when we were having an election for senator from the state of Illinois on election day, all of a sudden these guys in three-piece suits showed up. We'd never seen them in our neighborhood before. And there were some people who were reluctant to go out to the poll because they thought they were going to get arrested. So this type of intimidation, in fact, a lot of this stuff has been done before. They're just refining on tactics that they've used in the past. But with this COVID-19, I would volunteer to be a poll watcher, but at my age and with some underlying conditions, I can't see myself being at the poll. So are we in a way going to concede to the Proud Boys
No.
to be poll watchers?
No, Brother Harris, we are not. We have, our fraternity has a lawyers network that is being chaired by Brother Cecil Howard. We are partnering with the National Bar Association, as is our other Divine Nine brothers and sisters. So we will have a vanguard of lawyers all across the country. We've even set up in the fraternity, we've got a 1-800 number that we are circulating and will be used on election day. We've got brothers who have agreed to work at the polls on election day. And so we are not conceding anything. If anything, we have decided that this is truly a battle. It's a battle for the democracy of America. And so we will be at the polls working in record numbers as men of Alpha, along with our other Divine Nine. And we've got our lawyers on speed dial, because you're exactly right. These are tactics to intimidate voters and try to disencourage us from participating. Also, here in the state of North Carolina, when we were registering voters over the weekend, there's an agency here that if you call, they will give you free of charge hand sanitizer, mask, and other things for you to use on election day. So there's no excuse, but we're going to do everything we can to make sure that all citizens have the right to vote. And we're going to have our lawyers on speed dial and ready to go.
Very good.
Yeah, can I jump on something like that, Brother
Certainly.
Harris? I want to ask maybe Brother Ward can answer this question.
Yeah.
And it relates to what's happening in North Carolina and Pennsylvania and a lot of other states, and that is that absentee ballots are already out in many respects, and a lot of those ballots are already being rejected, especially in communities of color, because there are some rules in place that about witnesses and things like that. What is being done? I don't know what you're hearing from your former ties in the Democratic National Committee, Brother Ward, or whatnot. What's being done to help educate and assist voters, especially in communities of color, to make sure that they don't get tripped up over ballot, small ballot rules that can get their ballots rejected.
We're saying to people to check your voting, check your ballot. If there was a signature, you can correct that. The State Board of Elections is working with voters to make sure that their ballots are counted. Now you can imagine we're getting opposition from persons who don't want to have that happen, but we're encouraging people to make sure they check their ballots and make certain that all the necessary signatures and witnesses are there. You know, at one time you used to have that ballot notarized, and you had to have witnesses. You don't have to have it notarized any longer. All you need is one witness and your signature, and mail that ballot in. But what we're also doing is encouraging people to do early voting. I believe firmly that is the preferred is to do early voting as well.
Brother Ward, what are we going to do on November the 4th?
November 4th, I hope we will be in a position to know that there has been a major political paradigm shift in this country, and that we will have voted in an administration that is about inclusion, is about this nation working together in unison for the good of the nation, and that we have ended racial strife and divisiveness in this nation, and that we no longer have an administration that takes great pride in pitting one American citizen against the other. Because his brother William Barber has done so well in organizing, poverty knows no color lines and no geographical limitations. Poverty and injustice is impacting everybody. And we've got to make certain that we need a president, we need a nation, governors and local elected officials, state legislators, who understand that the betterment of this society is when all people are working together as Americans and not one against the other.
Well, I was just thinking that we need to maintain political engagement
Yeah,
because there's so many individuals who say, okay, I voted. That's it. It's over. Whether we win or whether we lose, they think that by having cast a vote, they've done their civic duty, not realizing that you've got local school boards, you've got local city councils, that we need to keep an eye on these various elected officials to make sure that our interests are being met. There was a time when even some of our major political figures running for Congress would be reelected. The voter turnout, especially in Black communities, was very low, and they didn't think that there was much that needed to be done. Although today there's a different movement, and even those individuals who've been in seats in Congress, especially in New York State, and who thought that their seats were safe, are finding out that there's a new generation on the move now. And they're not just looking to install people in office. And I think it's one of the things where we've got to look, we've kind of laid down our guard a little bit because we felt, well, if we've got some black faces in high places, that's it. We don't need to do anything else. But whether it's a black face or a white face, we've got to hold them accountable.
I agree. You know, I tell people all the time, politics is my sport for 365 days of the year. And we've got to be engaged 365 days of the year. That local school board member is making policy decisions that impact our children. So we need to understand that county commissioner is making decisions about the budget that goes to the school board and about the economic development that happens in our county. So it's 365 days of the year. So that's my sport that I work on every day, Brother Harris.
Oh,
And Brother Harris,
go
if I
ahead.
can jump in on something on that point from a journalism standpoint, and this gets back to a point we talked about earlier about supporting local journalism. One way of accountability is subscribing to local journalism. And if you're subscribing to local journalism, you're helping to keep a watchdog on that school board member, on that county commissioner, on that board of member of the supervisors and state legislature and city council and so forth. Because if they're not supported, they can't be sustained and pay the reporters to be on the beat, to be that extra eyewitness, to be a check on power. And that's why, we talk about subscribing. People want to get something for free. Well, we got to eat too. We have to have a roof over our heads too. And that's important.
Okay, Brother Paul,
You
got
have to have that
a word for us?
Paul, you got another question?
Well, I think our time is basically at an end, but we do have another program coming up in later in this month.
That's right. Time flies when you're having fun, huh, brothers? I mean,
Right.
Yes, indeed.
Outstanding.
an hour goes by
Brother Paul.
extremely fast. So, first of all, I just want to say thank you to our General President, Brother Dr. Everett B. Ward, our National Historian, Brother Dr. Robert L. Harris, and to our esteemed guest, the first Black man to serve as the President of the National Press Club, Brother Jeff Ballou. Final comments. Even when the polls are open to all, Negroes have shown themselves too slow to exercise their voting privileges. There must be a concerted effort on the part of Negro leaders to arouse their people from their apathetic indifference. In the past, apathy was a moral failure. Today, it is a form of moral and political suicide. Brother Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Ladies and gentlemen, vote like your life depends on it, because it just might. I'm Joe Paul. For more information about all the amazing things that we are doing all around the world, or to get back to the House of Alpha, please visit www.apa1906.net or follow us on social media at APA1906 Network. Until then, stay safe, stay vigilant, stay healthy, and we'll see you again. 06.